so chapter 18, what we did last week, we're going to just remind ourselves a little about the context of where we were, what was going on last week, chapter 18. What did we look at? Y'all going to talk to me tonight for sure. Sorta, yeah. We hadn't gotten to Sodom yet, but Abraham is sitting in his tent, and what happens? 3 visitors show up, and Abraham is the hospitable host, of course, and we saw that is a moral virtue in that day and age. It still is in some civilizations around the world, Bedouin culture. That is a sacred duty, you could say. And so Abraham does those things. And so as he is hospitable, Sarah is given the promise. And then last week we also saw that Abraham is given a lesson about God's justice. God brings Abraham to the precipice of, I don't know if this is true, but I see them standing on a cliff overlooking the valley, overlooking the city of Sodom and all that. He gives him a lesson. He says, should I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do? And he says, no, that he needs to teach his children justice and righteousness and those things. And then Abraham intercedes for the city of Sodom. He intercedes, and we watched him go from 50. If there's 50, will you spare the city? If there's 45, if there's 40, if there's 30, all the way down to 10. And when he got to 10, God said, I'll spare the city if there's 10 righteous people there. And we probably, don't know for sure, but we're probably thinking that Abraham's thinking about Lot and his wife and their 2 daughters. And he's, maybe they're betrothed to 2 men. We'll find that out in this chapter. So surely there's got to be 4 more. Maybe he's thinking, okay, 10 people, that'll save the city. And at the end of that episode, Abraham goes back to his tent. He's content to know that he has interceded for mercy to the God of the universe, and it's in his hands. And we see the 2 men, the 2 angels, they proceed to Sodom. So what we see now is we fast forward a little bit in chapter 19. The angels, it calls them men through the text, but we know already they're angels. Okay, so I may call them men, I may call them angels. Those two men get to the gates of Sodom, and what they find is Lot sitting at the gate. In verse 1, it says, the 2 angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he rose to meet them and bowed himself with his face to the earth. Now, we saw Lot. How did Lot get in Sodom? What was the first thing Lot did to move towards Sodom? How did that happen? He pitched his tent toward Sodom because there wasn't enough land for him and Abraham. Then the next time we saw Lot, where was he? The next time we saw, he was living in the city. And now we see him sitting in the gate of Sodom. What that means is, and it's questionable, but what I think it means, and what we see it in other places like Genesis 34 and the book of Ruth, is that the elders of the city sat in the city gate to give judgments and to hear complaints and to it's kind of the seat of government, if you will. And so you see Lot sitting in the city gate of Sodom. It could mean, I can't prove it, but it could mean that Lot is elevated to like an elder of the city. He's one of the decision makers in the city. It's possible. I can't prove that. Don't know for sure. But he's sitting in the gate of the city when these angels come. And the first thing you see about Lot is he demonstrates the same hospitable heart that we saw in Abraham. He wants to help these people. But what we're going to see through this whole chapter, although 2 Peter 2, 7 and 8 calls Lot a righteous man. He says Lot is a righteous man that was vexed, that was troubled, tormented by the wickedness that was around him. What we're going to see is that Lot is supremely compromised because he lives in this city. He's a righteous man. He doesn't like the wickedness. He's going to rail against that. We'll see it again. He's going to be rescued from the city. But at every turn, you just see Lot he's compromised because he's grown comfortable. He's grown comfortable in the setting that he's in. He's grown comfortable in what we might call the worldliness of this city. So he's compromised by the world. And when the angels come, he bows down. He greets them, and the first thing he does is just like Abraham did. Come on, man, help me out, Dustin. Man, I'm sick of this thing. And he said, My lords, please turn aside to your servant's house and spend the night and wash your feet. Then you may rise up early and go your way. They said, no, we will spend the night in the town square. Now, it wasn't uncommon for visitors, travelers, to stay in the town square. What's supposed to happen based on this kind of Bedouin culture, this culture of hospitality and what we've seen in Abraham, what was supposed to happen is they would stay in the town square and the townspeople would come out and meet them. They would bring them food. They would bring them things to accommodate them in their stay. That was normally what's going to happen. But when they say this, Lot says he pressed them strongly. So they turned aside. He does not want them staying in the middle of the city. So after he pressed them strongly, they turned aside to him and they entered his house, and he does the same thing for them that Abraham did in chapter 18. He makes them a feast, and he baked unleavened bread, and they ate. So you see this same moral uprightness. You see the same righteousness in Lot as you saw in Abraham. They bring him food and everything. Lot obviously knows that it's dangerous for them to stay in the city square. He obviously knows. Evidently it happens a lot. And Lot knows what's going to happen if they stay there. And so maybe that's why Lot was sitting in the city gate to protect travelers that would come through. Maybe, I'm not sure, but he doesn't want harm to befall these two, and he doesn't know that they're angels. He just thinks they're travelers. He just thinks they're men, and he's being hospitable to them. And so you can see here, just in the opening verses, Lot is a follower of God. He is what Peter calls him in 2 Peter, a righteous man. He is trying to do good. He's behaving just like Abraham behaved. And the question really that I have that we're going to answer a little later is, why does Lot continue to stay in this city that's obviously filled with wickedness? And so the visitors come. They finally accept after Lot's urging. And Lot takes them into their home, and he feeds them. He gives them a feast, does what he's supposed to do. And at this point is where things go nuts. In verse 4, it says, before they lay down, so they're getting ready to go to sleep, nightfall has happened. Before they lay down, the men of the city, now watch the repetition here. The men of the city, the men of Sodom, both young and old, all the people to the last man, surrounded the house. All the men, not the women, not the children. I guess you could say, it probably wasn't children, it was young and old men. All the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both young and old, all the people to the last man surrounded the house. And they called to Lot, where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us that we may know them. So I want you to see first off that this is not just a roving group of men that are in the city that, everybody else is just, in their house. I hope those crazy guys next door don't get at the visitor. This is every man in the city. This is every man in the city, both young and old, all of them, to the very last man. This is all of them, every single one, and it's only the men that surround the house. And they call, and basically what I'm getting at there is it shows just the depths of wickedness that this city has succumbed to. It's not just a few wicked people here and a few wicked people there. The entire city, just as God said, I've heard the outcry of this city and that there's the wickedness that's there, and I'm going down to see if it's true. And you see here that it is the entire city. It's all the men of the city, actually. All of them. It even says, even down to there's none. No man is sitting inside his house on this night. He's out in the square. He's out surrounding Lot's house. All of them are out there around Lot's house. And so they surround Lot's house, and they demand that these two visitors, they don't know that they're angels, they think they're just men that are visiting. They demand that these travelers be brought out so that they might know them. Now what they're saying is they want those men brought out so that they could have sex with them. They wanted to rape these men. And so there are, I don't know, maybe 30 years ago, around in that area, 30, 40 years ago, there were some scholarly books put out, and nobody reads academic books, but there were some academic books put out about why this is not true, that they just wanted to get acquainted with them. They wanted to practice hospitality, and nobody read those, and they were debunked. They were peer-reviewed by other academics, and they were dismissed as ridiculous. Well, in the last 20 years, there have been some popular books that have used these same arguments, the arguments that are coming out to say that the Bible doesn't condemn homosexuality, or that the men of Sodom weren't going to engage in homosexuality. They use the same arguments as those academics did that had been debunked, but they write them in a popular level book. I guess probably the most familiar one to all the people that you may have conversation with came out in 2014. It was by a young man named Matthew Vines, who went through each of the verses that talk about homosexuality and tried to prove that it wasn't condemning homosexuality. But to be honest with you, it doesn't make much sense, does it? I mean, where are the men that came to you tonight? Bring them out to us that we may know them. And in response to this, Lot is going to say in a minute, no, don't take them. Take my 2 teenage daughters who have never known a man. I mean, so his response to them shows he knew exactly what they were going to do. He knew exactly what they were going to do. And there's some passages. I was going to put these passages like from Ezekiel and show you some of the things that they do to try to get around these things that talk about the sin of Sodom. But just if you want to know about that, I can fill you in. That would take a lot of time. But every single verse that's tried to be debunked to show that the men of Sodom weren't actually talking about sex with these men has been thoroughly debunked and can be easily done so. It even talks about it in the New Testament, in Jude and different places. And so they wanted to know these men. Now, immediately when we hear this, I mean, it's a vivid picture. I mean, it's I don't want to say scary, but it's I don't know, it's just crazy. I mean, every single man in the city, every single one, from the youngest to the oldest to the last man, every single one came out, surrounded Lot's house. And all you can say is that I believe this is what it looked like when Paul references what happens when God turns people over to a reprobate mind. In Romans chapter 1, verse 26 and 27, it says, "For this reason God gave them up to dishonorable passions." It says God 3 times in Romans 1. It says God gave them up. He's talking about people who know the truth of God, but suppress that truth and choose to believe a lie. He says that God gave them up to dishonorable passions, for their women exchanged natural relations for those that are contrary to nature. And the men likewise gave up natural relations with the women and were consumed with passion for one another, men committing shameless acts with men and receiving in themselves the due penalty for their error. So what you see here is what happens when people are turned over to their base desire. It's very possible, and I'm speculating here, I don't know for sure, but it's very possible that when people choose to believe a lie, when they suppress the truth and unrighteousness, all those things are in Romans 1, and he goes down this darkening of the heart. This is the result. And what you see happening in Sodom around Lot's house is just madness. I mean, it's just madness. We'll see it as we continue to look. But they're surrounding the house. They want the visitors brought out. They want to know them in the biblical sense. And what Lot does, Lot went out to the men at the entrance, shut the door after him. Lot walks out his house, shuts the door, and he said, "I beg you, my brothers, do not act so wickedly." Now, Lot is right in calling them wicked for what they are trying to do. He's right. It is wicked. He pleads for his visitors, and he says that their behavior is wicked, but he also, in the same breath, calls them brothers, doesn't he? He says, "Oh, brothers, please don't do this wickedness." And here you start to see Lot is a righteous man and he's a follower of Christ, but he's allowed himself to become way too comfortable in the world. He's allowed himself to be compromised with the world. And then, verse 8, if I were these angels in the house and I heard Lot say this, I would have zapped him right on the spot. "Behold," he says, "I have 2 daughters who have not known any man." Do you think he's talking about his daughters just being hospitable to guys? No, we know what he's talking about. And that's what it meant when it says the men wanted the men to come out so they could know them. He says, no, don't do that. Instead, I have 2 daughters who have not known a man. Let me bring them out to you and do to them as you please. So you can see what the intent was for the men outside Lot's house. Only do nothing to these men, for they have come under the shelter of my roof. What Lot is doing here is trying to appease wicked people, doing a wicked act with another wicked act. Evidently, he takes his responsibility as a host a lot more serious than he takes his responsibility as a father. I can only think of, he thinks this might be the lesser of 2 evils. How could he suggest such a thing? What do you think? I mean, would that be the first suggestion that you...
Well, back then they held men a lot higher than they did women.
Yeah.
That's the only thing I can say.
She said back then they held men higher than they did women. Of course, even that is against what God said in Genesis 1 and 2. But you're right, that was the culture.
Well, we kind of get a similar picture to what Abraham, whenever he seen everybody coming to him previously, and how he wanted to, in the middle of the day, he was going out and serving them and getting everything. So, I mean, as they're guests in his house, he's wanting to treat them better than family, it sounds like.
Yeah. He says basically he's wanting to treat them better than family, like being a good host, like because hospitality was a moral issue. But I got to think protecting your daughters is a moral issue too. So...
Does it just show how corrupted he got by inching closer to the city and encompassing the lifestyle, just how skewed his perspective became by surrounding himself with those people?
Yeah. Matt said that it just shows how skewed he got and how corrupted he got by living in that culture. We're going to see that he is at every point he is compromised. He's compromised to the nth degree. Yes.
The only thing I wondered is, does he realize who these people are, these 2 men?
See, I don't think so.
God, you can't tell, but that's the only thing I wondered.
Yeah. He asked if he knew they were angels, if they knew that they were from God. There's nothing in the text. In fact, the angels will tell him what their mission is later in the text. So at this point, like I can't know for sure because it doesn't tell us, but at this point we can only assume Lot just thinks that they're visitors, that they're, he's trying to be hospitable. He's trying to keep something wicked from happening to them. And in the process of doing so, he's willing to sacrifice his own daughters. Yes?
Is it true that if you take someone in your house and you're the host, if something happens to them, then their family can come after you?
Yeah, no, that's true. I didn't think about that, but later in the Mosaic Law, it does say that. Like if you take people in your house, you're responsible, and you would have. Yeah, no, it doesn't. But you would have blood guilt, and they could seek vengeance. You'd have to go to a city of refuge. Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't think about that. So whatever Lot's motivation, he's bad wrong right here. So he's outside, and he's proposing this alternate scenario to these guys, and this is what they respond with. It says they said, "Stand back," and they said, "This fellow," talking about Lot, "came to sojourn." He's not even one of us. He's a sojourner among us, and he has become the judge. Now we will deal, listen to this, worse with you than with them. Then they pressed hard against the man Lot and drew near to break down the door. So now they're threatening to abuse Lot in the same way that in worse way that they're going to abuse these men. But do you notice the thing that set them off? The first thing Lot says to them, "Don't do this wicked thing." And they say, "Who are you, Mr. Sojourner, to judge us?" Boy, have you ever heard that? I mean, I'm sure you've heard that. They accuse him basically of trying to be their judge. They accuse him of, he's an outsider. I mean, he came from from Abraham's clan. And so they say, you don't have no right to condemn our way of life. You don't have any right to condemn what we do. And because you think you do, we're going to abuse you more than deal worse with you than we are with them. A lesson we can learn from this is when you compromise with wickedness, and that's what Lot was doing. He was trying to give a wicked act to appease wickedness so another wicked act wouldn't happen. Whenever you compromise with wickedness and try to give in and do the lesser of two evils, it never appeases. It never appeases wickedness. It never, of course, never appeases God, but it never stops there. It always draws men further and further into their wickedness. And so this scene is just surreal. And it's going on, and they want to know these men in the biblical sense. They want to, now they're going to abuse Lot in the same way. And who knows, as they're drawing near to break down the door, you can only imagine what's going to happen to his family, this is a serious situation. And what happens next is the angels, they reach out, the men, it calls them, we know they're angels, reached out their hands and brought Lot into the house with them and shut the door. Now, I want you to really see this. And they struck with blindness the men who were at the entrance of the house. So all the men of the city are outside Lot's house. The angels reach out, they pull Lot back in. There's enough talk. They shut the door. They strike all of the people with blindness, the men who were at the entrance of the house, both small and great, all of them, so that, now look what they did. They wore themselves out groping for the door. Now, if that doesn't show a reprobate mind that's been turned over to wickedness, I don't know what does. Now, imagine a scenario, okay? So I'm one of the men standing outside wanting to do this wicked act, and we're yelling and we're wanting Lot to let us in or bring them guys out, and then, the mass moves toward Lot, and we're going toward the door, and Lot, zips back into his house, and all of a sudden I'm blind. And no doubt all the people around me are blind. No doubt that they're all feeling around. They're probably yelling. You imagine if your sight goes off, you know what happens. They're all blind and they're all, in this state. And you got to think, well, this is happening for a reason. But even in their blindness, they still are groping for the door. They're still after what their wicked hearts desire. They're still turned over to that reprobate mind. They're still acting on their wickedness. That, to me, that's always been amazing. I want to think that if I was about to do something wicked or something like that and blindness just came upon me, that might make you think twice, don't you think? It might make you think, hey, at least let me get my bearings. Let me find out what's happening. What just happened? No. It says they were killing themselves trying to get the door. They were still trying to get into Lot's house. They were still trying to get after these visitors. It's just the depth of wickedness that we have a hard time understanding. They're so enslaved to their sin, to their lust, to their heart. That's scary. That's scary to be turned over to that kind of mind that just seeks what your heart desires through any semblance of judgment and warning of God or anything like that. They just keep on going. And it's at this point that the angels reveal their mission to Lot. So after the men are outside blinded and they're trying to grope for the door, Lot is in the house. It says, the men said to Lot, have you anyone else here, sons-in-law, sons, daughters, or anyone you have in the city? Bring them out of this place, for we are about to destroy this place, because the outcry against his people has become great before the Lord, and the Lord has sent us to destroy it. Here is where I think Lot understands who these men are and what their mission is. They warn him that this city is about to be under judgment. They tell him, get your family out of here. The city's going to be destroyed. Remember back when we saw him with Abraham, God told Abraham, I'm going down to see whether this outcry that I have from the city is true. And he sent those two angels because it's by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses that the death sentence is given in Old Testament law. And he sends them, well, the evidence is gathered and the evidence is in. The city's doomed. The city's doomed because here you have every single man in the city outside of Lot's house. Now they're blinded and they're still groping for the door to try to do this wicked, wicked thing. This warning that they give Lot, man, it's just the grace of God. It's the grace of God on display. Because, to be honest, they didn't find 10 people. They didn't find 10 people righteous in Sodom. Not at all. But God is still going to deliver the righteous out of the wicked, out of the hand. He's not going to bring judgment. We saw that last week. He's not going to bring judgment down upon the righteous with the wicked. And here's where I think Lot realizes that these are God's angels and their identity, and this is their mission. Now, from here to the end of to the section that we're going to do today, what we're going to do now is I want you to focus on Lot. And we're going to focus on Lot's character and his demeanor and his actions and what happens next. And I want you to see that Lot has become compromised because he is living in the midst of the world. Because he has moved closer and closer to Sodom, pitched his tent, then lived in it. Now he's probably a judge in the city, sitting in the city gates. Because he knows it's wicked. 2 Peter tells us that he's a righteous man that was tormented by the wickedness around him, and he refuses to leave the city, refuses to get out up until this point, for who knows why. We can only speculate. But because he is compromised, because he has grown at home in wickedness or in the world, he just does a lot of crazy things right here. First thing happens is he loses credibility. Lot went to he went out to his son-in-laws. His sons-in-laws, they weren't actually married, they were betrothed, were to marry his daughters. And he says, this is what he says, quoted, "Up, get out of this place, for the Lord is about to destroy the city." Simple, succinct, but they thought he was joking. But he seemed to his son-in-law to be jesting. Now, I don't know why. Did he usually joke about stuff like that? I mean, was he a flippant kind of guy that just joked all the time? I don't know. We don't know. But what it seems to me, and I can't prove this, this is just my thinking, this is my thought. You tell me what you think. Because he has been comfortable in the world, because he's been comfortable in this city, because he's risen to some authority in this city, it seems like, he's lost all credibility. He's lost all credibility with his sons-in-laws to tell them that God is the Lord is judging, and the Lord is going to destroy this city. So they think that he's joking. They don't believe that he's serious. When we live compromised with the world, when we live at home in worldliness, you lose your credibility. Yes?
Do you think these sons-in-laws were in the all-men conversation?
I don't think so. And I don't know why. I don't know. That's a question that I had. The question he has was, were these son-in-laws in the all men that were in the city? I don't think so, but it is possible. You're talking about a crowd of people. You're not talking about just 8, 9, 10 dudes. You're talking about a crowd of people. But I have a hard time. Maybe he didn't know they were there. I don't know. There's no way I can know that. But I don't think so, because Lot does go to them, and the angels specifically say, "Your sons-in-laws. You go and get them. You go and warn them of judgment." So they were to marry his daughters, so he goes out to warn them. Hey, we're leaving. God's going to destroy the city, and they think he's joking. What do you think?
They would have been blind if they had been among them.
That's true. They would have been blind. They would have been blind.
How long did they stay blind?
I have no idea. The word that's used is often, and this, just because it's used this way doesn't mean anything. Context determines the meaning of words, but the word that's used for blindness is often used for a temporary loss of sight in different places. So I don't know if they were blind forever, but that's something that we can't know. We just don't know. Just don't know. So, yeah, it's a good question. It's a good question. So at this point, sons-in-laws aren't going. And as the morning dawned, this all happened over a single night, the angels urged Lot, saying, Up, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, lest you be swept away in the punishment of the city. Now, they're basically telling them, look, time's up. Judgment's coming. And it's coming right now. You need to get up right now. You need to get whoever's in your house, your daughters and your wife, and you need to get out right now. And look at what Lot already saw them blind, all these people. He already heard them say they're going to destroy the city, and he believed it to the extent that he went and told his sons-in-laws that the city was going to be destroyed, and they say, okay, now's the time. You better get up. When it says up, it means get up now, immediately. Take your wife and your 2 daughters and get out of here, or you will be caught up in the punishment of the city. And Lot's response is to linger. Lot hesitated. He lingered, so the men seized him and his wife and his 2 daughters by the hand, and the Lord, being merciful to him, they brought him out of the city and set him outside of the city. Now, that's a pretty big mercy. Why would he linger? Why would he hesitate? We can only speculate. What do you think? I don't have a definitive answer. Why would Lot, living in Sodom after the events of the previous night, knowing judgment's coming, why would he linger? Why would he hesitate? What do you think, Dixie? Think he's waiting for the rest of the family to show up? I don't know either. That's the point. I don't know. Huh? He was leaving everything that he ever knew. He was leaving everything he'd built. You know, his house, his home, his life there in Sodom. He was comfortable. Yeah, he was comfortable.
Yeah, I agree.
Prestige, yeah.
What do you say, Dustin?
But he loved it.
He loved it. He loved the city he lived in. I can't argue that. That's probably true. But what you see here again is compromise. Lot is compromised. And God, in His mercy, because we saw when He talked to Abraham, God will allow suffering and trials and discipline to come upon His people, but He will never allow judgment to come down upon His people. And so these angels, they simply, when it says they seized him, they're not talking about just, hey, come on, let's go. They grabbed them and took them, I want to say drug, but they didn't drug him out of the city. They grabbed them and they pulled them out of the city. They took them out of the city. And God calls that forcing them. He calls it being merciful to him. And oh, indeed it is. That God would say, no, you're not thinking straight. You're not acting right. Grab you. I get a picture of grabbing him by his hair and say, come on, boy, you're coming with me. You're getting out of here right now. He didn't do that, but you know what I mean. I just get this picture of this, and it's mercy when God does that. When we're in a place of compromise where we're loving the world, and He takes His children and He will discipline you, and He will grab you by the nape of your neck, and He will make sure that you are not only understand that it is the word of the Lord that you are to follow, but to discipline you in such a way that He will bring you out, even if it breaks your legs. He will bring you out of His judgment.
Why would God bring Lot out of all the sin that he was in and not these others?
The last verse is going to tell us that. Hold your question. I'll tell you, because he was united with the covenant bearer who was Abraham. He was Abraham's because it had nothing to do with Lot. It had nothing to do with Lot's righteousness or his goodness, although we are told in Peter that Lot was a righteous man because he followed God. Righteous doesn't mean sinless. It doesn't mean perfection in the sense that we're thinking. The only reason that God brought Lot out of the city is because Lot is united in the covenant by Abraham. That's what the last verse in this chapter will tell us. So there you got a sneak preview.
He's not in the line of the covenant.
He's not the covenant bearer, but he is part of Abraham's family. And Abraham interceded for them before the angels went down. Patience, Matt.
I want to know now.
Well, you got your Bible with you? Look at the last verse in chapter 19. Look at the last verse in chapter 19. It'll tell you that. Yes.
And also, Pastor, it's His mercy.
Yeah, well, it's His mercy. Of course. Of course. The question he asked was, why did he save Lot, who was obviously compromised and obviously not doing everything that he was supposed to be doing? Why would he save him out of Sodom and not the rest of the people in Sodom?
His mercy saves us from judgment.
It does. Mercy saves us from judgment.
And he gives it where he wishes.
And he does.
Who are we to say?
That's right. But the Bible is going to tell us that it's because of Abraham that he saved Lot. And that's why his mercy was poured out on Lot, because he was connected to Abraham. And Abraham is the promise bearer. So, where am I at here? Sees him, they brought him out of the city. Now, Lot he's not done amazing us with his stupidity. They brought him out of the city. And as they brought him out, one of the angels said, escape for your life. He's telling him, you take off running. You go. Get as far away. Don't look back and don't stop anywhere in the valley. God's going to destroy this whole valley. Get out of here. Escape to the hills. Escape to the mountains, lest you be swept away in the judgment. That's pretty clear language. I mean, they had to grab him by the hand. They had to take him out of the city because he was lingering. And now it's almost, this is probably not true, but I get a picture of them grabbing the sides of his face. You need to run for your life. Do you not understand what's about to happen? And what does Lot do? He bickers and bargains about where he's got to go. Lot said to them, oh no, my lords, behold, your servant has found favor in your sight, and you have shown me great kindness in saving my life. But I cannot escape to the hills, lest the disaster overtake me and I die. Behold, this city is near enough to flee to, and it is a little one. So let me escape there. Is it not a little one? The name of the city is Zoar, which means little, and my life will be saved. Can you believe this guy? He better be glad God's God, because I'd have zapped him right then. He's told to escape the mountains, to escape for his life. This is serious. Don't look back. Get out of this valley. The whole thing's going to be destroyed. And he goes to negotiating. He goes to negotiating saying, I can't make it to the mountains. Why couldn't he make it, do you think? Do you think he just didn't like mountain living? I mean, I don't know. It doesn't tell us. So maybe he's thought he wasn't able to make it, maybe? Maybe he was not a fast runner? I don't know. Huh? What'd she say? I didn't hear.
Have you been on a road trip with 2 teenage girls?
He knew he wasn't going to make it because they were on a road trip with 2 teenage girls. Yeah. We don't know why. We don't know why. But there are a lot of commentators, Miss Sue, that do say he was accustomed to living in the city, and he liked city life, and he didn't want to go be a nomad like Abraham. He didn't want to do that anymore. And we don't know exactly why, but it amazes me that he would have the gall to say, yeah, the whole valley's going to be destroyed, but hey, come on, do I got to go all the way there? Let me stop right over here. I mean, it sounds like something Matt would do.
God has shown him grace and favor, and he's kind of been able to bargain and get his way in certain things.
He has.
So what's to stop him from asking for more?
And to be honest, yeah. So on the way out, while judgment's falling, can we stop at McDonald's and get him? Yeah. So
How far is the hills?
I don't know. I'd have to look at a map, but the valley the valley includes all of these 5 cities that we've been talking about all this time, Sodom and Gomorrah. It even includes Zoar, but Zoar is going to be spared because Lot enters it.
So Zoar looks roughly about 20 miles.
20 miles?
20 miles to the south.
But he says Zoar looks like it's 20 miles to the south of Sodom. So if that's the case, that's a pretty long distance. But what makes me think that it was still unacceptable for him to bicker and bargain is what the angel says next. When he says, okay, go, he says to him, behold, I grant you this favor also, that I will not overthrow the city of which you have spoken. He said, I'm going to destroy every other thing in this valley. I'm going to save this city. Escape there quickly. Now look what he says. For I can do nothing till you arrive there. You see it? God has ordained that His people will not undergo judgment. He says you need to get to that city as quick as you can because I can't do anything not till you get close, not till you get out of the blast zone, but till you arrive there. And therefore the name of the city was Zoar, which means little in Hebrew. And so if he were to go to the hills, presumably they would have to wait until he got into the hills, But now they say, okay, you want to go to Zoar, go ahead. We'll spare the city just because you're going to be in the city. And he says, but hurry up and get there because I can't do anything until you're there. It had been ordained that God was going to save Lot, and He was going to save his family. So his request is granted. Now, man, this is the grace of God on display, isn't it? Not only grace for Lot to go through hesitated and they have to take him out and then he's arguing about where he's going to go and just all of these things, living compromised in this city that he shouldn't have been living in the first place. All of this stuff goes on. Now God's grace extends to Zoar because of what Lot is pleading for him to do. And, it's grace that they just didn't kill him with all this whining that he's doing. The grace of God is every step of the way. Lot's been hesitant. He's been obstinate. And he'd rather than obeying their warnings and obeying what they're saying is going on, he's just been, they almost had to drag him kicking and screaming to where he needs to go in order to be safe. But they grant his request. And they said that they can't do anything until he gets there. And then obviously he got there because in verse 23 it says, when the sun had risen on the earth, when Lot came to Zoar. Now this is very important because this is a little different than you see in the movies. So I want to make sure you catch it. Lot came to Zoar. Then the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah sulfur and fire from the Lord out of heaven. Little hint of the Trinity right there. The Lord rained from the Lord out of heaven. And He overthrew those cities and all the valley and all the inhabitants of those cities and what grew on the ground. So, obviously Lot is in Zoar, right? It says he came to Zoar. The angel said, I can't do anything till you get to Zoar. Lot is in Zoar and they wipe out the whole valley. Now, you know what's going to happen. You've seen it. You've read it. Lot's wife behind him looked back and she became a pillar of salt. So he destroys the valley. Lot's wife is caught in judgment. She looks back, disobeying what the angel said. Don't look back. And contrary to the movies you might have seen of this depiction, it's not just her glancing over her shoulder as she's walking with her husband. Lot's in Zoar, and his daughters are in Zoar. She hung back. And the word look there is the word to gaze, to look longingly, to look intently. Do you have maybe the NIV or the New Living Translation, one of those translations? It says to look longingly. So it's not just a pillar of salt. It was her gazing, longing for the city that she obviously had grown accustomed to. Lot is in Zoar. He's in the city, and she has hung back behind him, looking, gazing back at this city, and she became a pillar of salt, got caught up in the judgment. Why did she look back? I do have an answer for this one, but why do you think she looked back? It's probably some of the same reasons we just mentioned about Lot a minute ago. What do you think? She didn't want to leave. But why? You're right. Yeah, she had all of her comforts. She had all of her stuff in the city. She had all of the things that they had built, and all of her desires and comforts and possessions and all that stuff was there. That was her life. And she did not want to leave the city. She was longing for that city. She was attached to all of her stuff. The reason I say that, and the reason why I can say that definitively, is because Jesus makes reference to this episode. In Luke chapter 17, verse 29 and 33, he's talking about when the Son of Man comes. He says, "But on the day when Lot went out from Sodom, fire and sulfur rained from heaven and destroyed them all. So will it be on the day when the Son of Man is revealed. On that day," it says, "let the one who is on the housetop with his goods in the house not come down to take them away." He says, "And likewise, let the one who is in the field not turn back." And then he says, "Remember Lot's wife." And then he says, "Whoever seeks to preserve his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life will keep it." So in the context of that statement, he's saying that that's what Lot's wife wanted to do. She wanted to preserve her life in Sodom. She was, as the people will be, to, if you're on the roof, don't go down and get your stuff and try to run off and go away. That's what she was trying to do. She was looking at her stuff. She wanted the comforts of Sodom. She wanted the life that she had built there. She wanted those things. And Jesus said, "Remember Lot's wife. Whoever seeks to preserve their life will lose it." He's talking about our life in this world. Whoever loses his life in this world, will keep it. He's talking about living for ourselves. That's what she wanted to do. And so, questions, comments?
You don't think that it's just that they didn't believe that God would really do that?
Well, I'm sure she didn't believe that God would really do that. But when the sulfur starts falling and explosions start happening, at some point you got to say, okay, you know. The thing is, I think, and you know, we can debate this. It may not. I don't want to be dogmatic about it, but I don't think, based on the grammar and based on the way that Jesus uses this picture, I don't think it was just a disobedience of the angel where she, snuck a glance and kept on walking and just, pillar of salt. I think she turned around as her family kept going into Zoar, and she was missing Sodom. She was lamenting having to leave Sodom. She was longing for Sodom. She was gazing intently towards Sodom as the city was going up in flames. And that's why judgment fell upon her.
Barbara said she wanted to see the fireworks.
She wanted to see the fireworks. Well, she saw them for a minute, and then she became a salt lick. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Was she Lot's wife before she went to Sodom? I think so. I'd have to check to be sure, but I think so. And the reason I think so is because Lot's family and his herdsmen and all that grew so big that he couldn't stay with Abraham. So that's what I think, but I'd have to look to be sure. Yes?
Gary Edfinger is asking, why did Lot run ahead of his wife and not be aware that she was behind him?
Well, that's a question I can't answer, but what I think is they were scrambling to the city, running for their lives as judgment was about to fall, and she stopped and turned back. Not turned back to go back, but just turned back to look. I'm not sure. That was a question from Gary. Why didn't Lot wait on his wife?
So if this Zoar was 20 miles away and they were on foot, how much time elapsed from when they left the city to when they got to the, is this like 3 days?
No. This is overnight. So maybe they had camels, maybe they had horses, I don't know. So, that's what you're stuck on? I mean, we're talking about fire falling from the sky, and you're stuck on them not being able to go 20 miles overnight?
On Sunday, you can't just go out and run a marathon. I didn't see you guys training.
Okay. Matt is now barred from all future Bible studies. Yeah. They might not have been on foot. They may have been on horseback. They may have been on camels. I don't know. We don't know. It doesn't say.
Is this a picture of salvation?
Yep.
Because the angels could have dragged them all the way to the devil. They completely brought them out of harm's way because they didn't destroy anything
Until they got it. Yep.
And then they gave them the warning.
Mm-hmm.
So
It is a picture.
of a heart change.
It is a picture of salvation.
We have to do some of our part.
Well, they drug him out of the city.
But then they gave him the warning. Don't long for what you're leaving behind.
Yeah, but then he said, I don't want to go there. I want to go somewhere else.
Still with them?
Huh?
Wasn't the angel still with them?
I don't think so. I think they were there in the valley as fire and brimstone fell. Well, yeah, I guess so. She said they could ride on angels, I guess. I don't know. We don't know. All we know is that the next verse says, Abraham went early in the morning to the place where he stood before the Lord, and he looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the land of the valley, and he looked, and behold, the smoke of the land went up like the smoke of a furnace. So the destruction happened overnight. It was dark when it was getting evening when the visitors came into the city. So all this happened overnight. All this happened, and Abraham now gets up out of his tent, and he walks to the place where him and God had this conversation in Genesis 18, and he looks out, and all he sees is smoke coming up from this entire valley. What do you think's going through his mind? Lot's dead. Or there must not have been 10 righteous people in the whole city. We'll talk about that more later, about what he knew, what he didn't know, but the last verse that we're going to look at is the last part of this section, and this answers your question, Matt. It says, So it was that when God destroyed the cities of the valley, God remembered not Lot, but Abraham, and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow when he overthrew the cities in which Lot had lived. So yes, John, this is a picture of salvation, because what you see is Lot is far from a perfect man. In fact, Lot's a compromised man. So compromised that he loved the city that he lived in. We saw that when he lingered and hesitated and didn't want to go, and they had to take him by the hand. We saw that he called the wicked men of the city, his brothers, when he addressed them. We saw that he was willing to give up his daughters to appease them just to satisfy their wickedness. We saw that when he came out of, they had to pull him out of the city, and then he argued with them about where he was wanting to live after all this was destroyed. And so, yes, Lot was righteous because he was a follower of God. We see that in 2 Peter. I told you that 2 or 3 times. But it's not because he's good that he was brought out of the city. It's not because he is following God with all of his heart and mind that he's brought out of this city. It's not because of anything Lot is done to make himself worthy for God to save him or remove him from the city. It's because he has been united to the covenant bearer of God, and that's why. It's because of Abraham. God remembering his covenant with Abraham, his faithfulness to Abraham, and that's why he saved Lot out of the city. And that, my friends, is a picture of salvation, because you and I are compromised. We're not worthy. We fail at every level, but because we're united to the covenant bearer, who is Jesus Christ, God saves us out of the judgment because of what he has promised in Abraham through Jesus Christ, not because of anything that we do. Questions, comments?
I guess I got just one. I mean, going back to the son-in-law thinking he was joking,
Mm-hmm.
he must have been so comfortable and so in love with his life that he didn't show any love towards God, because that would have been the first time that they heard him saying something, get up and flee, God's going to destroy the city.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, if you think about it, if they'd never seen him, be devout and loving of the Lord, the first time for him to say this would have been bizarre, or would have been odd to them. So they would
Maybe. He said that he was so compromised, and it might have been the first time that his sons-in-laws had ever seen him talk about the Lord. It's possible, but we don't want to get too. Lot was a sinner, and he was compromised, and he did some dumb things all through this deal. But the Apostle Peter does tell us that he was a righteous man, and that he was tormented. It says in 2 Peter, tormented by the wickedness that was around him. But his problem was he wouldn't leave the city. He wouldn't leave the city until it was almost too late. Yeah. So the theme, I guess, if you want to take away from chapter 19, it's not about just the wickedness of the men of the city and homosexuality and what God calls an abomination in several places. It's more about Lot and his compromise with the men of the city, his compromise to live in the city, his compromise to long for the city, and so much that he bickers and argues with the ones who are trying to save him from the destruction that's coming. And it's easy to see ourselves in that position sometimes. It's easy to be at ease in the world and to get comfortable in the world and to look when God's calling us over here to say, but all my stuff's over here. I don't want to leave. I don't want to leave these things. So yeah, questions, comments, cries of outrage. You reading your Bible over there a while? Any other questions? Okay. All right. Hula, why don't you pray for us and we'll be dismissed.